At 7:46 p.m., the police report lay open on the kitchen table, my name printed in bold letters. No one in the living room spoke. My husband's jaw tightened. My sister-in-law's smirk faded. The same people who once said I was too emotional were suddenly afraid to breathe. They thought this was just another argument. It wasn't. It was the moment everything they'd hidden finally came to light. Before I tell you how a quiet wife turned a household upside down, hit that like button and tell me where you're watching from, because this story goes far beyond Times Square. When I came home that evening, I expected quiet. I expected the usual routine after a long day. I expected the house to feel normal, the way it had felt for decades. Instead, the air inside felt heavy the moment I stepped through the door. My feet were barely on the rug when I noticed the change. Something was wrong, and it was wrong in a way I could not ignore. The hallway lights were on, but the room felt cold. My husband stood in the center of the living room, not waiting to greet me, not asking how my day was, not even pretending to be calm. His face was red and his hands were shaking, and he looked at me like I was a stranger who had walked into the wrong home. I felt my chest tighten because I knew that when a man looks at his wife like that, something has snapped. I took one more step forward, and that is when the full weight of it hit me. My suitcase, which had been in the closet, was on the floor. Clothes were thrown out of it, scattered everywhere like the aftermath of a storm. Shoes were tossed near the wall. Some of my things were in a trash bag, like I was someone who deserved to be cleaned out of the house. Not a single item was folded. Not a single thing was handled with care. It was a scene that told me he had not acted out of frustration. He had acted out of intention. He wanted chaos. He wanted to scare me. He wanted to make sure I understood that this was not a conversation, but an order. I stood there in silence, staring at my belongings on the floor. My heart beat slowly at first, then harder as the reality settled in. This was my home. These were my things. This was supposed to be the place where I was safe. And yet the man I had shared years with stood there acting like I was nothing. His eyes had no softness, no regret, no hesitation. The room felt smaller as I looked at him. The fear did not come all at once. It came in small pieces as my mind tried to understand the moment. He was not yelling at that second, but the anger in his face was loud enough. I noticed more signs the longer I looked around. The pictures that used to sit on the shelves were turned face down. The blanket I kept on the sofa, the one my daughter had given me years ago, was thrown into a corner. Even the vase I loved had been pushed sideways, as if he could not stand anything that belonged to me in its normal place. None of these things happened by accident. He had walked through the house with one goal: to erase me, to push me out before I even had a chance to argue. I felt the betrayal deeper than the shock. It was not just the sudden demand he made. It was everything that had led up to it. Years of tension, years of small changes. But in that moment, those thoughts came only in pieces. The immediate truth was simple. He wanted me out, not tomorrow, not after a discussion, not after we talked like partners. He wanted me gone that night, without warning, without time to think, and without dignity. The man who once promised to protect me now acted like I was a burden he could not wait to throw out the door. My breath grew heavier. My hands started to shake, but I did not let myself fall apart. I forced myself to look directly at him, to understand what I was dealing with. His stance was firm, and his expression made something inside me go cold. There was no misunderstanding the message. He had been planning this moment. He wanted control. He wanted to see fear. He wanted me to leave my own home as if I had no place in it. It was a feeling that hit deeper than anger. It was the kind of pain only someone you trust can create. The house around me felt different now. The walls looked unfamiliar. The furniture felt distant. Even the air seemed to change. My heart hurt in a way I cannot describe, because betrayal does not hit like a fast punch. It rolls in slow waves, each one worse than the last. And as I stood there with my scattered belongings around my feet, I realized this was not a moment of misunderstanding. This was a choice he had made, fully aware of what it would do to me. He stood there, waiting for me to react, waiting for me to break, waiting for me to move toward the door. But I did not move. I just absorbed the moment. every detail, every insult, every sign. Because sometimes the shock is not just what is happening, it is understanding that the person you trusted the most is the one who wants you gone the fastest. And that was the moment everything changed. When he stood there with that cold, proud look on his face, something inside me changed. I did not raise my voice. I did not argue. I simply stood still and let the weight of the moment settle in the room. For years, I had lived through his moods, his silence, his small jabs, and his attempts to make me feel smaller than I was. But this moment was different. His anger was sharp, almost rehearsed, as if he had been waiting for the chance to throw me out and feel powerful in front of anyone watching. There was a strange calm in my chest, a calm that came from finally seeing him clearly, without excuses, without hope that he would change. When he smirked, thinking I was weak, thinking I would cry, thinking I would break, he did not notice that I was studying him with a different kind of strength. He thought he had already won. He thought he controlled the ending. Standing there, I felt years of silence pressing down on me. Years of letting him have the final word. Years of adjusting myself so he would not explode. Years of carrying the weight of the house, the children, the bills, and every detail while he played the role of a man who believed everything belonged to him. Now, his face was twisted in arrogance, and he waited for me to collapse the way I always used to. But I did not. Instead, I took small breaths and let the truth rise inside me. I realized that the moment he told me to leave was the moment he gave away every secret he had tried to hide. A man who is truly confident does not need to shout. A man who is truly in control does not need to demand. A man who believes he is right does not fear silence. But he feared mine. As he stood there with that mocking smile, I felt like I was watching a stranger who wanted obedience, not partnership, control, not love, victory, not peace. There was no warmth in the room, only the feeling of a fight he thought he had already won. But he misunderstood the woman standing in front of him. He misunderstood the years I had spent learning how to survive, how to listen, how to study every detail of a situation, how to carry a family on my shoulders. He misunderstood the strength that grows in a woman who has lived through disappointment after disappointment and still stood every morning. He misunderstood what happens when a woman finally stops hoping for kindness and starts preparing for truth. The longer he stared at me, the more he looked irritated by my calm face. He expected tears, weakness, fear, anything that would prove he was still the one in control. But all he saw was a quiet woman who was not shaking, not begging, not confused. That bothered him more than anything he had shouted. In that moment, I understood him better than he understood himself. He wanted power, and the only way he knew how to feel it was by taking something from me. He wanted the house. He wanted the pride of pushing me out. He wanted to show the children he was the one who made decisions. He wanted to break me because my strength reminded him of his own failures. That smirk on his face was not confidence. It was fear wearing a mask. Standing there, I remembered the subtle things he had said for years. Little comments meant to undermine me. Little laughs meant to make me feel small. Little sighs meant to remind me that he believed everything would fall apart without him. But I also remembered every time I fixed something on my own, every bill I paid, every mess I cleaned, every problem I solved while he pretended to carry the weight of the house. When I looked at him that day, I felt older, wiser, and strangely stronger. All those years of endurance had taught me something he never learned. Silence can be a weapon when used by someone who finally sees the truth. His smirk faded for a moment when he realized I was not responding the way he expected. That moment was small, but I noticed it. It was the moment he understood I was no longer the same woman who used to shrink under pressure. He did not know it, but the balance of power had already shifted. My calm frightened him far more than my fear ever could. In his eyes, I saw the first spark of doubt, the first sign that maybe he had pushed too far. The first hint that he had no idea what I was capable of. And when I turned away from him without a single word, his silence told me everything. The man who tried to throw me out was not prepared for the woman I had finally become. When I think back over the years of that marriage, it becomes clear that this moment did not come out of nowhere. It was not sudden, and it was not surprising. It was the result of years of slow changes, small shifts in attitude, and repeated signs that I kept ignoring because I believed a family should stay together. I raised the children mostly on my own, while he worked long hours and came home with a tired face and a heavier temper each year. In the early years, I tried to excuse it. I told myself that stress made him act sharp. I told myself that he needed rest, not confrontation. I told myself that families go through difficult seasons, but those seasons turned into years, and those years shaped a version of him that treated me more like a housekeeper than a partner. I carried the responsibilities: cooking, cleaning, planning school events, nursing sick children, keeping the bills paid on time, and even smoothing over his rough edges when family visited. The children saw me as their anchor. They came to me with school problems, heartbreaks, injuries, fears, and decisions. They knew I would always make time. Their father stayed distant, giving instructions instead of comfort, commands instead of conversation. I tried to bridge the gap between them, believing it was my responsibility to make the home calm and united. I took on the emotional labor while he drifted farther from us, building walls that I kept trying to tear down with patience that never seemed to be enough. I stopped expecting appreciation because it only caused disappointment. Instead, I worked quietly, believing my effort would someday be recognized when the children were older and he softened with age. But he hardened. He became more controlling, not less. He questioned how I spent money even when every bill was handled on time. He criticized the meals even when he contributed nothing to the planning. He grew irritated when I asked simple questions. He acted insulted when I took a break for myself. Every small moment became a reminder that I was living with a man who saw my care as obligation, not love. When the children became teenagers, they noticed the distance too. They defended me at times, but he dismissed them and claimed they were choosing sides. That only made things worse. He withdrew further, spending more time out of the house, more time on his phone, more time acting as if we were burdens. Still, I stayed because I believed in keeping the family whole. I believed he would change when he realized how much we needed him. I believed he would one day appreciate the years I poured into the family without asking for anything back. But instead, the older he got, the more entitled he felt. He acted like the house was only his. He acted like the children were only his responsibility when it benefited him. He acted like my years of sacrifice were invisible. He used silence to punish, sharp words to wound, and distance to control. Sometimes he would go days without speaking directly to me unless he wanted something. I learned to navigate the tension like a map. I knew when to stay quiet, when to step back, when to redirect the children, and when to simply remove myself from the room. The worst part was the way he began treating me in front of the children. He laughed off my suggestions as if they were foolish. He rolled his eyes when I spoke, making the children shrink with discomfort. He made me feel small in a home I had held together with my bare hands. And each time I stayed silent, thinking it would keep the peace, the silence carved another space for disrespect to grow. I kept focusing on the children's needs, hoping that after they were grown, he and I could rebuild. But the truth is, he never wanted to rebuild. He wanted control. He wanted the feeling of superiority that came from speaking to me like I was beneath him. He wanted to be the king of a castle I maintained for years without praise. So when he stood in front of me that night, telling me to pack my bags, it was not just a sudden burst of anger. It was the moment every slow insult, every ignored effort, every quiet sacrifice, every lonely night, and every attempt to hold the marriage together came crashing down. It was years of disrespect condensed into one command meant to break me. But instead of breaking, something inside me finally woke up. And that was the beginning of everything that would follow. The shift from being controlled to taking back control. It was the end of quietly surviving and the start of standing up for what I had earned, what I had built, and what I deserved. The night my husband tried to throw me out was not born in a single moment. It was the result of years of small cuts, each one so quiet and so ordinary that most people would have ignored them, but I felt every single one of them. They sat heavy on my chest, even on days when I told myself everything was fine. It started with little changes in his attitude, small shifts in his tone, and the way he reacted whenever I spoke. He began to act like my words had no weight, like anything I said was just noise in the background. I noticed how he stopped looking at me when I talked, how he began answering me with short and sharp replies, or sometimes no reply at all. These small signs may sound harmless, but when you live with them every day, they slowly take away your sense of worth. Then came the small insults that he tried to hide as jokes. He would say things that were meant to sound harmless, but they carried a sting that I felt deep inside. He made comments about how I managed the house, how I handled the children, or how I looked when I was tired. Sometimes he said I complained too much or asked too many questions, and whenever I tried to express my feelings, he would wave his hand like I was being dramatic. These small dismissals made the house feel colder than any winter morning. Even the silence between us felt like another form of punishment. I also saw how he treated me in front of our children. He didn't speak to me with respect, and over time, the children began picking up on his tone. When they mirrored his behavior, he didn't stop them. He let it happen. It taught them that their mother didn't deserve simple kindness, and that hurt me more than anything else. I had spent years raising them, helping with homework, cooking meals, staying up late when they were sick, and still showing up for work in the mornings. Yet when he dismissed me, it felt like all my sacrifices meant nothing. It was a slow weakening of my role in my own home. The financial control also crept in quietly. At first, he simply suggested taking over a few payments because he said it would make things easier for me. Then he started handling more and more of the money, eventually keeping bank cards in places I could not reach. He would get upset if I asked for my own financial details. He said it stressed him out when I wanted to be involved. Even the grocery money became something I had to ask for. It was humiliating. I felt like I was shrinking inside my own life. I stopped buying small things for myself. I stopped planning outings or dinners. I stopped sharing ideas because I knew he would ignore them. These small acts of control added up until I barely recognized the confident woman I used to be. There were also times when he would make decisions without telling me. If he wanted to buy something big, he did it without discussion. When he wanted to invite people over, he told me at the last minute and expected me to prepare everything. He took my time for granted and acted like my life existed only to serve his needs. If I ever questioned him, he would sigh loudly, acting annoyed, as if my feelings were nothing more than an inconvenience. He made me feel like a guest in my own home, and sometimes even that felt generous. The tension grew stronger each time he embarrassed me in front of others. During family gatherings, he made comments about how I didn't understand things, or how I worried too much. His family laughed with him. Mine looked at me with pity. He enjoyed placing himself above me, and every time he did it, I felt another piece of myself fall away. Even when I tried to ignore it, the weight of these moments built a pressure that I could no longer pretend wasn't there. The worst part was that the children saw it. They learned that disrespecting me was acceptable, normal, even expected. These small abuses were quiet, steady, and painful. They chipped away at my confidence one day at a time. They prepared the ground for the moment he told me to pack my bags and leave. That night was not sudden. It was the final chapter of a long book I never agreed to write. When he shouted at me, he believed he had already broken me through years of erosion. But he was wrong. Those small abuses did not weaken me. They made me patient. They made me observant. And they made me ready for the moment when everything would finally turn. When he told me to get out, I thought he was only trying to scare me. I had seen his temper many times. I had watched him slam doors, break small things, and shout whenever life didn't go his way. But that night was different. There was no pause, no moment where he stepped back and tried to calm himself. Instead, he moved with purpose, with a kind of cold anger I had never seen in all our years together. He grabbed bags from the closet and threw them on the bed like I had already agreed to leave. I stood frozen, watching him toss my clothes around as if they were trash. Some shirts fell on the floor. One drawer hit the wall. My hands shook, but I kept my face steady, not wanting him to see fear. My heart beat fast, but I held myself together. I reminded myself that panic never helps. I told myself to watch, stay quiet, and not give him the reaction he wanted. He walked back and forth, grabbing more things, pushing them into the bags with no care. He knocked over my picture frames. The sound of cracked glass filled the room, but he didn't stop. He even threw one of my old coats toward the hallway. I had worn that coat when I first held our daughter in my arms. I felt a sting in my chest when it hit the floor. I tried to swallow the hurt, but I could feel the weight inside me getting heavier. He didn't notice. He was too focused on packing my life away as fast as he could, as if he wanted no trace of me left behind. The children were in the living room. I could hear them whispering. Their voices were thin, unsure, frightened. They didn't come into the bedroom. I didn't blame them. They were used to his moods, and they had learned the hard way not to step into the middle of them. I wanted to go to them, to hold them, to tell them I was not going anywhere. But my husband blocked the doorway, muttering to himself as he shoved more things into the bags. His shoulders were stiff. His posture was hard. I could feel the anger rolling off him like heat from a fire. Then he picked up one of the bags and tossed it toward the door. It landed near the children's feet. I heard a small gasp. They were scared, and the sound cut through me sharper than anything else. He didn't care. He told them to watch, as if this moment was some sort of lesson. He wanted them to see me fall apart. He wanted to show them that he held the power. I stood my ground. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't beg. I didn't move. I watched him instead. Every action, every move, every sign that showed who he had really become. My silence irritated him more than anything I could have said. He threw another bag, harder this time. It bounced and hit the wall with a thud. The children backed away. He moved toward my small jewelry box next. It wasn't expensive, but it held the last gift my mother gave me before she passed. He opened it without care and tipped it over so everything spilled onto the carpet. Rings rolled, a small gold chain slipped under the dresser. My breath caught, but I still didn't speak. I didn't want to give him even one drop of satisfaction. He wanted me to break. He wanted me to scream or cry so he could feel victorious. Instead, I stood completely still, like a wall he couldn't knock down. His anger grew. His voice grew louder. His movements turned sharper. He kicked the edge of the bed frame. He slammed his hands on the dresser. He tried to make himself look bigger, stronger, more in control. But all I saw was a man losing the last pieces of respect he once had. He had no idea that every cruel act he committed only made me stronger inside. He thought this night would break me. He thought forcing me to leave would destroy whatever little courage I had left. But watching him behave this way only showed me the truth. He no longer deserved the loyalty I had given him for so many years. When he finally stopped to catch his breath, the room was a mess. My clothes were on the floor, drawers left open, pillows tossed aside, memories scattered like debris. I looked at the children. Their eyes were wide, their hands were shaking, and that was the moment I felt something shift inside me. The fear didn't disappear, but it changed into something else, a quiet, steady strength I hadn't felt in a long time. I realized that he could throw things, he could shout, he could try to push me out the door, but he couldn't decide my fate, not anymore. I stood there, calm, steady, watching him realize he hadn't scared me. And that calmness, that silence, was the beginning of everything that came next. When I stepped away from the chaos of that night, the shouts, the thrown clothes, the shaking hands of my children, I finally allowed myself to breathe. It was a slow, steady breath, the kind that makes your chest feel tight at first, and then releases something you did not even know you were holding in. I walked into the small spare room where I kept my old documents, memories, and papers that most people would have thrown away years ago. But I had kept everything because part of me always knew that one day I might need them. I had lived a long life, and life had taught me that people can change, and not always for the better. As I sat down with the lamp burning warm light across the dusty boxes, I realized I had more protection than I thought. I opened the first box and saw old property papers I had signed years ago, long before my husband began acting like he owned everything. I found the agreements we made when we bought this house, agreements that clearly listed my name first, my income first, my approval required for any changes. I remembered the early years when we worked together, when he still respected me, when we made decisions as a team. Those papers were proof of a different time, but they were also proof of something stronger, that I had legal standing in this home, and he could not simply force me out because he was angry, frustrated, or trying to prove something to himself. The longer I looked through the files, the clearer everything became. I found bank statements showing my contributions, receipts that proved I had paid for repairs, upgrades, and even part of the land itself. There were papers signed with witnesses present, papers that he probably assumed I had forgotten, but I had not forgotten. I had simply never needed to use them until now. I placed each important document into a neat, organized pile, making sure nothing was missing. For the first time that night, I felt something change inside me. The fear was still there, but now it came with a sharp, steady strength. I picked up my phone and scrolled through my contacts with calm hands. I found the number of an old friend, someone who had helped me years ago when I thought I might leave the marriage for different reasons. She had once told me that if I ever needed support, legal advice, or someone who understood the law better than I did, she would be there. She had friends in places that mattered. Friends who did not get intimidated by raised voices or controlling men. As I sat on that small bed with the documents spread out beside me, I realized I needed someone like that now. I did not text her in anger. I did not call her crying. I used the same calm voice I had used all evening, the voice that shocked even me. I explained what happened, step by step, as if I were describing a business problem instead of a marriage falling apart. She listened, and she understood. She promised to connect me with a lawyer she trusted, someone who had handled cases far more complicated than mine, someone who knew exactly how to protect a woman's rights when a husband tried to take everything from her, someone who would not be fooled by charm, anger, or manipulation. That promise felt like a lifeline. For the first time that night, I did not feel alone. When I hung up, I looked around the room again. Every document, every file, every detail of my life in this home was now organized in a way that made sense. I realized something surprising. I had been stronger all along. I had lived years thinking I had no power, thinking my voice was smaller than his, thinking my needs came second because that was the role I was supposed to play. But now, with the weight of those documents in my hands, I saw the truth. I had power he never expected. I had knowledge he assumed I did not understand. And I had allies he did not know existed. The more I thought about it, the clearer things became. I understood now that his rage came from fear. He saw my independence and strength as a threat. He saw my calm as defiance. He saw my silence as rebellion. He tried to regain control the only way he knew how, through intimidation. But intimidation does not work on someone who has already lived through worse. I had survived years of stress, loss, sacrifice, and heartbreak. A man shouting in a living room could not break me, not anymore. By the time the house fell quiet and the children had gone upstairs, I had made my decision. This was no longer about anger or revenge. This was about safety, dignity, and the life I had built with my own hands. I placed the documents inside a folder and held it close. This folder was my shield, my truth, my protection, and I knew that with one call in the morning, everything he thought he controlled would no longer be his decision to make. When I finally reached out for help, I did it quietly and with a steady mind, because I knew panic would only cloud my judgment. I sat alone in the small guest room, the only space in the house that still felt untouched by his anger. My hands were shaking, not from fear anymore, but from pure exhaustion after the long hours of fighting for my dignity. I scrolled through my phone and found the number of my lawyer, the same person who had helped me settle a financial matter years earlier. I remembered how patient he had been then, and how he had told me that I should never let anyone push me into a corner. Tonight, his words echoed louder than ever. When I pressed call, I felt something shift inside me. It was not weakness. It was strength returning after being buried for far too long. The moment he picked up, I explained everything in the calmest way I could. I did not raise my voice or let tears break my words. I just laid out the facts, the threats, the yelling, the attempt to throw me out of my own home, and the way my husband had packed some of my belongings as if they were trash. As I talked, my lawyer listened with the kind of silence that told me he was already building the solution in his mind. He didn't interrupt or rush me. He allowed me to speak until I had nothing left to say. Then, in a very composed tone, he explained exactly what my rights were, what my husband could not legally do, and how quickly we could take action before the situation spiraled even further. Every sentence he spoke felt like a rope pulling me up from the deep hole my husband tried to push me into. He told me that I had every right to stay in the house because my name was on the title. He reminded me that years ago, when I helped make financial decisions and sign documents, it had actually secured my position more than I realized. He told me that a person cannot simply force their spouse out in anger, and that what my husband had done could be reported as emotional abuse. He even mentioned that if the threats escalated, I had the right to request immediate protective actions from local authorities. For the first time that night, I felt the weight on my chest loosen. I wasn't powerless. I wasn't trapped. I wasn't alone in this fight. Knowledge was giving me air again. My lawyer assured me he would prepare official warnings and documents by morning. That alone brought me a sense of control I hadn't felt in years. He instructed me not to leave the house, not to argue further, and not to give in to fear. He said the law would protect me, and he would make sure of it. Hearing that gave me a sudden wave of clarity. I realized my husband had spent so much time making me feel small that he truly believed I had no support, no strength, and no ability to push back. But he was wrong. I had spent my entire life solving problems he never even knew existed, holding the family together in ways he never noticed. Now, I would use that same quiet strength to save myself. After ending the call, I sat still for a long moment and let the information sink in. I could almost hear the house breathing around me, still heavy with the echo of his anger. But the fear that had once filled every corner of the room began to fade. It was replaced by a sense of determination. I knew the night would be long, but it no longer felt hopeless. I could face whatever came next because I had taken the first step toward protecting my life and my rights. My lawyer's words played in my mind again and again, each time stronger than the last. He would regret ever thinking he could scare me. I looked around the room and realized something important. This wasn't just about staying in the house. It was about claiming the respect I had let slip away piece by piece. It was about ending years of silence, years of bending without breaking, years of believing that keeping peace meant keeping quiet. Tonight was different. Tonight, I lifted my voice, not by yelling back at him, but by taking action that he never saw coming. And tomorrow, when the sun rose and he learned what I had done, he would understand that the woman he tried to throw out was not the same woman who had walked into that house earlier. She was stronger. She was clearer. She was ready. This was not fear anymore. This was preparation. And by morning, he would learn exactly what that meant. When the morning finally arrived, the air in the house felt different. It was heavy, tense, almost like the walls themselves were waiting for what would happen next. I had barely slept, but I did not feel tired. I felt steady. I felt ready. The lawyer had already gone over everything with me. every document, every right, every option I had. He laid it all out clearly, and for the first time in a long time, I saw how strong my position really was. While my husband thought he could push me out like I was nothing, the truth was the exact opposite. Everything he thought he controlled depended on my signature, my approval, my history in this home. He had no idea how the ground under his feet had already shifted. He came into the living room, rubbing his eyes, acting like nothing had happened the night before, acting like I had overreacted, like he was the victim of stress or bad timing. That fake calm tone he always used drifted into the room, but it did not hit me the way it used to. I no longer felt small in front of him. I no longer felt scared. I no longer felt like I had to wait for his moods to settle before I could speak. I was done waiting. I was done shrinking. He sat down on the couch like he owned the house, like he owned me, not knowing that within the next few minutes, that illusion would break apart right in front of him. I placed the folder on the table, the one my lawyer helped me prepare. It was thick, heavy with proof, rights, and legal records. He barely glanced at it before shrugging, as if he didn't care, as if nothing in my hands could possibly touch him. That arrogance was exactly why we were standing in this war in the first place. He always acted like no one could ever call him out, like no one could ever stop him. I opened the folder slowly, and the sound of paper sliding against paper finally made him look up. I watched his eyes narrow. I watched irritation turn into curiosity, then curiosity turn into something much colder. I told him clearly these were the terms. He could either accept them or face legal action that would take away the house he was trying so hard to throw me out of. I wasn't yelling. I wasn't shaking. My voice was steady, calm. And when you speak calmly to a man who is used to controlling you through anger, it shakes him more than any screaming ever could. He laughed at first, a low, mocking laugh, but I didn't react. I simply moved the papers closer to him and told him to read. The more he read, the faster the smirk disappeared from his face. It took a full minute for the reality to hit him, a full minute before he realized he wasn't the one with power anymore. I watched it happen slowly, like a cloud passing over his face. I saw his pride crack, piece by piece, as he flipped through the legal rights I had, the ownership, the documented contributions, the agreements he had signed without ever reading. He had always been so sure I wasn't paying attention. He had always assumed I didn't know how to protect myself. He had always believed I was too soft, too trusting, too dependent. But he forgot that women like me survive by observing everything, by remembering everything, by knowing when the moment finally comes to stand up. He placed the papers down, and for the first time in years, he looked uncertain. He asked what I wanted, not angrily, not loudly, but quietly. That alone told me the balance had shifted. I told him the truth. I wasn't leaving my home. I wasn't letting him throw me out. And if he ever tried anything like that again, if he threatened me, belittled me, or tried to turn the children against me, I would move forward with every legal option I had. I would protect myself fully, and I would not hesitate. He sat frozen, the weight of reality hanging over him. Every word I spoke hit him like a stone. He knew now that the woman he had bullied for years was not the same woman standing in front of him. He knew I had the power to tear apart the illusion he depended on. He knew if he didn't comply, the consequences would fall entirely on him. I watched him swallow hard. I watched him breathe unevenly. I watched him try to piece together his pride while knowing he had no ground left to stand on. That was the ultimatum. It wasn't shouted. It wasn't emotional. It wasn't dramatic. It was simple, steady, and final. Either he respected my rights, or he would lose everything he thought he controlled, and he knew I meant every word. He didn't sign right away. Men like him rarely do. Pride is a stubborn thing, but he didn't argue either. He didn't shout. He didn't insult me. He only stared at the papers, realizing they represented the truth he had ignored for far too long. For the first time in decades, he finally understood that I was not afraid of him anymore. The moment everything shifted was quieter than I expected. After nights of stress, hours of fear, and a whole lifetime of holding myself together for a man who never once understood my worth, the house suddenly felt different. My husband stood in the middle of the living room, finally stripped of his arrogance. He wasn't shouting anymore. He wasn't pacing or throwing my things or telling the children lies about me. He just stood there, pale and drained, realizing that all the control he believed he had was never truly his. I watched him read through every page the lawyer prepared. I watched the shock move across his face as he understood that the house, the savings, the bills, the accounts, the authority over everything he thought he owned were legally secured in my name long before he tried to push me out. I didn't rush him. I didn't explain myself. I didn't soothe him. I simply let him face the truth. And once he understood, he finally stopped pretending he could win. He signed his name without protest. The children stayed in the hallway, silent, confused, but watching. They had seen him throw my clothes across rooms. They had seen him mock me. They had seen the fear in my eyes every time his mood shifted. Now they were seeing something new. They were seeing that strength doesn't always shout. Sometimes it stands still and lets justice do the talking. My husband refused to look at me, but I didn't need him to. I didn't want comfort or apologies. I wanted the security he tried to tear away from me. When the documents were signed, my lawyer nodded, confirming what I already knew. The house was legally mine, not his, not shared, mine. The years I spent raising children, cooking meals, cleaning rooms, stretching dollars, and holding the family together were finally recognized in a way he could never undo. He stepped back, as if the papers burned his hands. I didn't gloat. I didn't celebrate. I didn't need to. The victory wasn't loud. It was steady, solid, and final. The children looked at him and then at me, clearly trying to process what had just happened. The man who always acted strong now looked unbearably small, and the woman he tried to throw away now stood firm without raising her voice. He walked out of the room first, shoving the door as if he could still show anger, but it didn't matter anymore. His power dissolved hours ago. The house felt calmer without his presence. I walked through each room slowly, not because I doubted the outcome, but because I needed the reminder that I had fought for this. I had endured years of disrespect, countless dismissive gestures, nights where I cried alone after he belittled me, mornings where I forced myself to stay positive for the children, and enough small humiliations to crush anyone else. But I didn't break. And now I had something real to show for it. When he returned later that evening, he didn't speak. He simply moved through the house quietly, avoiding the children, avoiding me, avoiding even his own reflection. It was the first time I saw regret on his face. The family arrived later after hearing rumors. Every single one of them walked inside waiting to see a broken woman. Instead, they saw the opposite. They saw a woman who had taken every insult, every moment of fear, every attempt to control her, and used it as fuel. They saw a woman who turned her husband's attempt to push her out into the very moment she took everything back. Some of them were stunned into silence. Some were ashamed they hadn't helped sooner. Some couldn't even look at me because they realized the version of me they had believed was shaped by his lies. But now they knew the truth. I didn't explain anything. I just stood with the legal papers in my hands. My husband couldn't hide. He sat alone, staring at the floor, while the family he once impressed now saw him for who he really was. They didn't defend him. They didn't comfort him. They didn't question me. They saw the strength they underestimated. They saw the boundaries he had crossed. And for the first time, they understood why I fought back. The house was mine. The respect was mine. The freedom was mine. And the silence in that room was the consequence he never thought he would face. That day became the turning point in my life, the moment I stopped surviving and finally started living on my own terms. The days that followed felt heavy, but they were finally quiet in a way that made sense to me. The house no longer carried the weight of shouting, threats, or fear. For the first time in many years, I could walk from room to room without feeling watched or judged. I could cook without hearing someone complain. I could sit on the sofa without someone telling me to move. It was shocking how different the house felt once the tension left. I realized how much I had accepted because I wanted peace, even when there was no real peace to keep. When a woman lives with pressure for too long, she starts thinking the pressure is normal. Now that it was gone, I understood how unhealthy it had been for me. My children watched me carefully in the days after everything happened. Their eyes showed a mix of confusion, guilt, and respect. They had seen their father lose control. They had seen him try to throw me out of a house I kept together for decades. They had seen him act as if I had no value. And then they saw me stand firm, use my rights, protect myself, and stay. They saw that I did not need to scream or threaten. I simply used what I had earned through years of responsibility and quiet strength. That changed something in them. They had grown up seeing their father speak louder, interrupt faster, and demand more. Now they were seeing a different type of strength, one that did not shout but still stood its ground. I spent time alone after that, thinking about why it took me so long to recognize my own value. I had given everything to my marriage. I stayed when the arguments got worse. I worked when money was short. I raised the children while he slept or left. I kept the house clean, even when no one thanked me. I sacrificed vacations, hobbies, and dreams because I wanted a stable family. Yet in the end, all of that was nearly thrown away in one night. That realization shook me. It made me understand that love without respect is not love at all. It is dependence. It is fear disguised as duty, and I promised myself I would not fall into that again. The change inside me grew stronger each day. I started setting rules for myself, not for others. I decided I would no longer accept being treated as if my life belonged to someone else. I would make decisions based on what was right for me. If something made me feel small, I would walk away. If someone tried to control me, I would use my rights. If a situation made me doubt myself, I would remind myself of the night I stood my ground. I realized that being a wife, mother, or grandmother does not erase the fact that I am still a person, and I deserve safety and respect like anyone else. Over time, the rest of the family reacted in their own ways. Some were surprised, some were relieved, some were embarrassed that they had not stepped in sooner. A few who used to treat me lightly now looked at me with new understanding. They saw I wasn't weak. I had simply been quiet. Quiet women are often mistaken for powerless women, but that is rarely true. We hold families together. We solve problems silently. We carry more than anyone realizes. The difference now was that I was no longer silent at the cost of my own peace. My husband avoided me at first. He walked around the house like a stranger, careful and hesitant. He realized that his actions had consequences. He understood that what he had tried to do could have changed everything. He did not threaten again. He did not shout again. He moved with caution because he finally recognized that I had more strength than he ever imagined. Watching him adjust to his own loss of dominance was another reminder that people rarely change until they are forced to face the truth. And he had been forced. In the end, I did not win through force or anger. I won by remembering who I was. I won by using my rights and refusing to be scared. I won by understanding that I did not have to accept abuse just because it came from someone I once loved. My victory was not loud. It was steady, it was earned, and it was final. The moral of my story is simple. A woman must never let anyone strip away her worth, no matter how long she has been quiet. Respect is not given to those who stay silent. It is earned by those who finally stand up. And the moment I stood up, my whole family learned that the woman they thought they could push aside was the same woman who had held everything together for years. I rebuilt my dignity, I protected my home, I kept my peace, and I walked forward knowing that sometimes the most powerful moment in a woman's life is the moment she refuses to break.